very recently, India's ambassador to the United States was here in Los Angeles, and he asked for a number of meetings. He came to me, his office came to me and said, "I want to meet a group of medical device executives." That was the only industry group that the ambassador chose to meet. And I'm just highlighting that not because I was there or helped to arrange the meeting, but the importance that India places on the medical device ecosystem. And so
And you
there's a
got a plug of your book. I mean, that's not bad right
yeah,
there.
yeah, they asked for that. So, yeah, but in the photograph on the left, you see some of the people who were there, and they include some fairly large companies that all of us know, as well as a bunch of startups ranging from angel-funded companies all the way to one that has raised over $200 million here in Los Angeles. So, medical devices and that ecosystem is very important to India today. Um, Very briefly about who I am and what I do. My company helps Western entities to deal with India, and the medical device sector is about 40% of the work that we do. I also write a lot about India, and I speak at events, all across the country. I've spoken at MDM West and others. I won't dwell on that. I just wanted to give you where I'm coming from in terms of my background. This is my daily life, helping Western companies to understand India. Okay, so apologies to Barbara Mandrell. The first surprise is that India went digital, when digital health wasn't cool. So I go to the JP Morgan conference occasionally, and about 5 years ago, they began talking about digital health very vigorously. And it was interesting that, what used to be the subject of the Consumer Electronics Show suddenly became the subject of the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference, and one year both were held in the same week, which became a real problem. But let's talk about India. Okay, so go back to the 1990s in India. There's no HIPAA law as such, so privacy has never been an issue. If you go to see a doctor in any mid-sized town, what you talk to the doctor about is completely audible to the patients who might be waiting to see the doctor. So the concept of medical privacy that we have is a relatively new thing in India. And as the Indian programmers were writing code for Y2K, if some of you remember that, many local physicians across India said, "Hey, I want to computerize my records." So electronic health records, not in any robust way, but they became very common and popular among the major cities. And much of this was custom programming that each physician or physician office was getting done for themselves. Okay. So this started, more than 20 years ago in India. The other factor to keep in mind, and this graph here, I wish I could have enlarged it better. This shows the urban-rural divide in India over the last 5 years. India is rapidly urbanizing, but even by 2022, less than 35% of Indians will live in cities. Okay. Now, why is that important to us? Okay. Most doctors don't want to live in rural India. Most doctors want to live in big cities where they have all the conveniences, but most patients live in the villages and don't often have transportation to come to the city. So back when we still had landlines and modems and people were building devices to let physicians in cities communicate with patients in villages, and often there would be a shared device that one person, typically a woman, would have with a little camera and set up with maybe some sensors to measure blood pressure and so on. And these were all jury-rigged devices that people kind of built in their backyards or living rooms and set up in across the villages in India. And the idea was that what we now call telehealth, which was a big deal in the United States, right? How can we have the doctor examine a patient when the patient isn't in the exam room? This became fairly common in India. It was not terribly robust. It didn't work very well, but the technology platform was laid out really in the early 2000s. The other factor then that happened was India at that time had maybe 4 or 5 million landlines at people's homes in a country of over a billion. But then the cell phones arrived, and India went from almost no cell phones to today over a billion people having cell phones. And these were mostly people who didn't have a landline, who didn't have a computer, a laptop, a tablet, and they went straight into mobile phones. And thanks to companies such as Uber, many of them graduated to smartphones as quickly as possible. Most of these are Android phones. They can't afford Apple devices. but the Android smartphones have become pretty much the norm across urban India and also much of rural India today.
Okay.
And so all of the people in India trying to innovate in the healthcare space have really became glued to the mobile phone. I know here you see pictures of a little boy and a very old man with cell phones. These were considered remarkable 5 or 10 years ago, but today they are not, because pretty much everybody in India has a phone, and I think there are about 400 million smartphones. So any application or device you can imagine, has been mobile enabled in India very, very rapidly. And uh, so this has allowed India to leapfrog the West in terms of communications, particularly in our space of medical devices. I remember many years ago, one of our clients makes staplers, medical surgical staplers, and they wanted to add a device to count the number of staples the physician had fired from the stapler, so they knew if they were going to run out. Right? This in India would be considered a trivial project that would be done, by a freshman electrical engineering student in a week. But for our, I won't name the company, it took them, a good 6 months, and they spent maybe $250,000 to add that functionality to their device. Okay. So there was a considerable gap in terms of the way people were looking at telecom. And
Let me stop you
today,
there. Go
yes.
back just a sec. So first, I really enjoyed that background and that history. I could just sit here and eat it up. What you said at the very end there, I think, is at the heart of what our guests today want to understand. So
Mhm.
background was great, and then you gave us a very specific example, and I'd like to understand what the takeaway is. You said in India, some freshmen can just bang that out, and in the West, they spent $250,000 and spent 6 months. What's the implication for a medical device manufacturer then? Because I believe, but do not know, that the West did that because we have regulations and requirements and approvals and la la la, and perhaps India lacks that kind of infrastructure, and so you can just add that. And
Right.
what would I do with that information? Because here
Sure,
I am in
sure.
the
Good
West.
point. So I would put that in the past tense. India lacked that infrastructure. Okay. The point I'm trying to make here is that there are
Okay.
over a million programmers in India who now today understand medical devices and understand the link between digital health and medical devices, and have since in the last 5 to 10 years been trained how to build devices that are safe, effective, and meet regulations. Okay? So all that has happened, and some of my future slides will get into that. I just
Okay.
wanted to illustrate with this preface here what were the causes behind India's fast developing capability. It was like the wild west of the 1800s, when there was, or the Gilded Age, as I think we call it, where there was tremendous innovation, whether it was the railroads or
Hmm.
telegraph or whatever,
Yes.
and there were very few rules, and things were not fair or balanced. But at the end of it, a lot of good things came out. Many bad things too, but many good things came out. Okay, and the next slide, Joe, did I answer your question?
You did, thank you. I just, I think the implication is, that what you described as the past, and perhaps it's a bit more cumbersome in India now because it has to be.
Perhaps, and I will get into some slides about India's engineering capabilities soon. Um, so on this slide, I just want to show you some of the things that have happened in the Indian ecosystem, so distinct and different from the US. So I got my COVID vaccination. You go in, you say who you are, you get a vaccine, but the government doesn't know how old you are except what you tell them. They don't know where you live except what you tell them at that moment. So today, if the state of California really wants to know how many Californians have not been vaccinated, where do they live, and what is their age, they have no idea. Okay, it's
You're
all
saying in California, we have no idea?
in across the US. Much of this information is self-reported. Right, today I can go down to the CVS and get a second vaccine. Right,
Hmm.
I can just say, I got Moderna, I want Pfizer now. Okay, I don't have to tell them anything, and they'll just give me the vaccine for free. Okay,
Hmm.
there's no comprehensive database that tracks all of this. Okay,
Hmm.
and we have reasons why we are worried about privacy and the
I'm
overreach of the
surprised
government
about
and so
that,
on.
but are you about to draw a comparison where in India they would know every last thing?
So the very first item on the top left here is the universal ID card. Okay, this one called the Aadhaar card. Aadhaar means like foundation. So today, 99% of Indians in a 1.4 billion population have a biometric card with them that identifies who they are and when they were born. Okay? All vaccinations in India are tied to this Aadhaar card. So Indians are known to be very inventive and try to find shortcuts and so on. But the government is using the Aadhaar card as a method for the phased vaccination program. So healthcare workers got it first, and then senior citizens, so on. Whatever, they have a plan, but they're executing the plan based on the universal ID. Okay,
And when
and
was
so
that
they.
introduced?
I'm sorry.
When was the universal ID card introduced?
So this was conceived about 15 years ago, and it was a massive database project, as you can imagine. I think it was largely initiated about 6 years ago, and then it took 2 or 3 years before everybody really had access to an Aadhaar card. But that process is pretty much complete. There are
So you
still,
believe nearly 100% of the population has it now?
I believe, at least 99% does. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So with that basis, it's been much easier to track not just COVID vaccinations, but really all kinds of healthcare.
The
And the
second
next,
point is saying that you have a single payer system.
no, I'm not saying that. A few years ago, like 3 years ago, India introduced the idea of the government as the payer, which is very similar to our Medicaid system here. It only covers the 500 million poorest Indians. Okay? So people in the middle class, people in the upper class do not have access to this government as a payer program. Much like in the US, we don't have, you don't get Medicaid unless you meet certain financial guidelines.
Mm-hmm.
500 million is still, only about
A
1/3
third,
of the population
right?
of India. Yeah. And this is a relatively new program. It's being, not all hospitals are accepting it. Similar to Medicaid here, with many clinics and hospitals don't want to participate. But it has given access to medical care to people who really had no access at all until this program. So if you get sick, you don't have a lot of options if you were in this group. In addition, the government has introduced a number of other initiatives. They have, and I won't get too technical here for our discussion, but they introduced this concept of the India Stack for digital communications. And this is not specific to healthcare, but they wanted to have a system where Indian financial institutions, government agencies, and others could communicate with one another and with the population in a very structured manner. Okay? The stack structure is defined, but foreign companies are playing within that. And then last year, India announced what they call the National Digital Health Mission. So it's actually run by a friend of mine who also went to the same school as I did. And some of the diagrams you see on the right are the basic architecture for the software that they have defined. And you'll see it includes medical device companies, it includes physicians, it includes government agencies. It's a fairly integrated structure. Now, this may take another 10 years to implement, but the government has that vision to, bring health information together for the entire country. Okay? So all of these factors are causing the capabilities of software and digital health and interface to hardware devices to become extremely robust. And that's an asset that the entire world can benefit from in terms of the skill set that India has created. Okay, so let me move on to the next item, which ties in very well. Again, Joe, you anticipated where I was going. So I want to start with the idea of India's technical talent. This is the second point, being able to help Western medical device companies. This has been going on for a while. Okay. Here's one example. On the right, you see the picture of what they call a baby warmer named Lullaby, which GE Healthcare had designed in India. GE Healthcare, and I think they've changed names now, but they have over 5,000 engineers working for them in Bangalore, and they've come out with many products, a low-cost ultrasound, and many other medical-related products.
Before I forget, I have a friend of Indian descent, a 10X attendee, who worked on a similar device as it related to jaundice for infants. I think I could put you in touch with him. Vivek, I can't pronounce his last name, but remind me afterward.
Sure,
Might be
I'd
helpful.
love to know.
I've already looked ahead to the next slide. Would you mind jumping to it? I'm going to try to keep us on time a bit.
Sure. Okay, so I don't know how many of the audience are in the engineering design kind of sector, but here what I'm illustrating is that the pathway to using Indian talent can vary depending on the initiative and the project. So for a project E, for example, you're only doing test and verify and some development and design in India. But look at project C, where the investigation, the early stage investigation, the voice of customer, all of that could happen offshore. The concept development and the whole package. Okay? So this depends on the stage where the company is, the complexity of the device, the knowledge of the team in India, whether it's in-house or not. There are many, many factors, but there's no one answer for everybody. That's really all I wanted to illustrate with this. And I have a couple of case studies here on why people chose a particular path. I'm going to skip these in the interest of time. Okay?
And what I'm doing now is I've already uploaded your presentation to the cloud, and I'm going to put it in the chat box for everyone, so they can maybe look ahead a little bit,
Sure.
and there may be some slides of particular interest that they want you to touch, because you're right, we won't be able to hit everything as hard as we might like. So
Okay.
yeah, I'd agree on these two.
Sure. Okay. This slide here shows, basically how much time and cost the company would need to spend versus how you capture the resources of people in India. So the easiest way is to tie up with a local vendor in India that provides engineering services. You contract work out to them, they do the work, you pay them, you're done. Much like medical device design outsourcing works in the US. Okay, so it doesn't take a lot of effort to set it up, but you don't have the same degree of control, and you may not be willing to share your internal secrets with a third-party company. The other extent here, the other dimension is a captive R&D center, which many of the large companies have done, such as Medtronic, which used to be our client when Covidian was an independent company. And Medtronic today has, I think, close to 1,000 people working in the city of Hyderabad, which have a Medtronic badge. They're Medtronic India employees, and they're doing engineering and innovation work. So there's that whole spectrum between completely outsourced and completely captive, as they call it in India. And then there are, grades in the middle, which I won't get into. There's value to both solutions, and many companies who are mature will have some engineers on their own payroll, and then other work might be outsourced to engineering service providers.
Your next section I'm interested in, you talk about the next 3 billion, and your next slide talks about the India market, but
Right.
Who's the 3 billion? Because that's twice your population if you go to the next slide.
Absolutely. So India has only 1.5 billion people, but the idea is that if you develop a product that works in India, okay, you can sell that product across Southeast Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and Eastern Europe. And India is a pretty tough place to do business. So, a friend of mine used to run Cummins in India, and he actually, he coined this phrase, you win in India, you can win anywhere in the emerging world. Exception being China, because China is its own ecosystem with a much larger medical device market. So I wouldn't say that success in India would lead to success in China. In some cases, it might. But we see this already with companies in India in the medical device business. When they choose to expand, initially they focused on Eastern Europe and Africa. They didn't try to enter the United States because the US FDA is a big barrier.
This point that you have here, creating airlines before airports, what does that mean?
India is a demand-driven society, so all resources are maxed out, Joe. So they build an airport, but the number of flights coming into it far exceeds the normal gate capacity that you or I might see in the United States. And the same thing has happened with highways. They build the highways, and by the time the highway is done, it's already overcrowded because the population and the traffic has exceeded the planned capacity. That kind of happens here in Los Angeles too, frankly, if you've been here and seen our traffic. But in India, that seems to be the steady state. So the point really is that, particularly when you compare it with China, many of you who might have traveled there, and you see these wonderful highways, these great bullet trains, massive, massive infrastructure, plenty of office space, riding really on the fact that Chinese consumers, when they put their money in the bank, they get virtually no return on it, or even in the stock market, and the government takes that money and puts it to good use in building the infrastructure. India has the problem that infrastructure has been growing very rapidly, don't get me wrong, but it usually lags demand rather than leads demand compared to China. That was the point I was making with that. Okay.
And next.
Okay. So let me move on. So India's economy is about $3 trillion, and India is now among the top 12 trading partners to the United States. The interesting thing is that there's a tremendous number of medical device companies of Indian origin, but most of them make low-cost products, disposables, low-end things. So foreign medical device companies still control two-thirds of the market by revenue, not by quantity, not by number of employees, but by revenue. And there are plenty of companies that are extremely successful in India. I have some examples of recent products on the next slide. Most prominent would be Johnson and Johnson, whose revenues in India are in excess of $1 billion. Now that includes their pharmaceutical side as well. Okay. India is a cash pay market largely, although it's changing. As I mentioned, the lower 500 million now have some access to public health care, and there is some corporate private insurance as well. So here are some products that have been introduced to India in the last 3 to 5 years. I run a blog called The India Expert. And if you go to theindiaexpert.com and search for medical devices, all of these will show up there. So the continuous glucose monitoring from Freestyle or Abbott was introduced not so long ago. India has a very large population of diabetics. This mitral heart valve was introduced a year ago. Medtronic has been in India for a long time. They don't enjoy the dominance that they do here in the US, but they have introduced, they are big in stents and a lot of the other cardiovascular devices, but they introduced this surgical robotic device last year into India. And
Is this India Expert exclusively your site?
Yes, the indiaexpert.com is my blog.
And all of these categories that you've discussed are things that you personally have covered?
So the blog really provides news and information.
I have
we
here
certainly
the
are not active
category medical technology. I just shared that with the group.
Right. Yeah. We are very active in medical devices. We are active in consumer products. We are active in defense. Many of the others are there for information. My mission is to help Americans understand India. I can't, I want to be able to help 1,000 people understand India and 100 of them become our clients. That's very good. So not all those categories are categories on the blog that we work in actively.
I just was overwhelmed when I hit categories. I was like,
yeah, I know.
I'm very interested in slide 17, please.
This one?
Yes, please.
Okay. So the thing about India in all of its aspects is its tremendous diversity. Okay. And, for everything I can tell you about India, I can tell you the exact opposite, and both would be true. So you have to understand that paradox about India, to be able to be successful there. So on the left, I have, photograph of the Apollo Hospital. This is their hospital in Chennai in South India, where Apollo is headquartered. But they now have almost 75 hospitals across the country, all offering absolutely world-class service. It was founded by Dr. Pratap Reddy, Indian American who practiced in the United States. I believe he was at the Cleveland Clinic for many years. Went back to India in the 1980s and has built a very successful public company. These guys are offering service at the same levels that you would expect to see at a Cedar Sinai here in Los Angeles, or a Mayo Clinic, or any of the top hospitals in the US. This has been tested by various organizations that have evaluated their results, and they were featured by the Harvard Business School in a case study. In fact, about 5 years ago, I spoke at the India conference at Harvard, and they had invited Dr. Reddy's daughter, who's now running the company, Sangeeta Reddy, to be a speaker at the India conference at Harvard, and she talked about some of the things that they've done.
Dr. Reddy's a publicly traded company, isn't it?
Apollo is a publicly traded company, yes. Sir.
But there was a company called Dr. Reddy, right?
So Reddy is like Jones,
Oh, okay. So it's not the same guy.
Not the same guy. So in the state of Andhra Pradesh, they say if you throw a rock, it'll land on a Reddy.
Okay.
So Dr. Reddy's Labs is a completely different company from Apollo.
Okay, my ignorance. Now, let me ask you, again, in absolute ignorance, the class system is still very much in place there. Is that true?
I think you're asking about the caste system.
Yes.
Yeah, the caste system.
You did that very gracefully.
Yeah,
the caste system slid over my ignorance, but I appreciate that.
Yeah. So we should do another session on the cultural and socioeconomic structure of India. But to be brief, caste
So
system
I'm
has
looking at the
existed for
difference between
5,000
these
years.
pictures.
The Today, what matters in India, and as India is moving, is more class than caste, okay, and socioeconomic class in particular. So by look, you know, by just looking at someone, I can tell whether they're upper class or lower class. Okay, it's unfortunate, but that's the case. Here in the U.S., if you're wearing Levi jeans, you can't tell. I used to live in Malibu, and people used to say you can't tell the bums from the billionaires there, because the dress doesn't reveal that. But here, you can see, like on the picture on the left, that's a general hospital run by the government, and this is where people with limited means would go, and you can tell by looking at them. But the more important thing is that they don't get the same care that would be offered by an Apollo or a Narayan Hirdale. Now, there's an important exception to that I want to mention, just so people are aware. So some of the top hospitals in India actually take a portion of their revenue and allocate it to treat poor patients for free. Okay?
Hmm.
But there's no way that they can cover any significant percentage of the population.
Right.
That's their give back to society. Uh, Most famous of these is the Narayan Hirdale, which is a heart hospital in Bangalore. And I think that one third of the patients that they treat are for free. Okay? So
Do
they
the
do have that
poorest
value.
people have a powerful, influential advocate for for it to change so the disparity between the best and the worst is not so gross?
So it is changing over time, and the current prime minister has really led the way. You can criticize Narendra Modi for a lot of things, but he has really led the way in the empowerment of women and the availability of health and dignity to the poorest people. So this program to fund government healthcare for the poorest 500 million people is certainly a step in that direction. But the power they have in India, being a democracy, is the power of the ballot box. When somebody is running for election in India, I promise you, they do not go after the guys and women who are treated at Apollo hospitals, because there's too few of them. Okay? You want to appeal to the large numbers, and these are pretty much the people, the lower 700 million of India's 1.4 billion. So that's the power they really have, is the power at the ballot box, which every elected official, whether it's in India or the United States, recognizes. Right?
My very, very, as has been clear already, limited understanding of India and matters concerning India. I'm thinking that not terribly long ago, there were like covers about Modi just being godlike and people adoring him. And then COVID was like, my God, how he has disappointed the people. Can you give us a sense from your perspective? Uh, does he have any real threat to losing power? Or is he going to be there for the next 2 decades or as long as he lives?
You know, Living for many decades in this country, I've learned never to try to predict what will happen in politics. So it's hard to say. Over the last 3 years, Modi has survived some huge challenges and actually come out ahead in the polls. Okay, the hit with COVID has been the most severe. Okay, this has really been the most severe crisis India has faced since 75 years of being an independent country. Okay, uh, will the voters blame Modi for it? I don't know. Okay, will the upper middle class and the intellectual elites blame Modi for it? Probably yes, but they are not the ones who are casting the votes in large numbers. So I
And
don't know.
if he is displaced, um, not knowing the other camp at all, what impact, if any, do you think might materially affect people on this call interested in perhaps introducing medical technology into the country?
So
Do you
India
think
has
it'll be
had changes
more
of
or
government in,
less
yeah,
hospitable?
right. So India has had changes of party a number of times in the last 25 years. Some things have stayed constant. One is the relationship with the United States has gotten better, whether it was Clinton or Bush or Trump or Obama or Modi on this side, it hasn't made a difference. The two countries have continued to come closer. India has continued to liberalize its economy, and that has been a constant factor. Modi did accelerate the simplification and documentation of medical device regulations, which had been lingering for about 15 years in the previous government. So that has been corrected. Modi's government did not reverse many of the programs that the other government had initiated. And I don't think they can take away the program for the poorest 500 million people. I think that's it's like the third rail in India now, right? Like nobody can mess with Social Security here in the US. It's kind of similar in India, I think, because of the reach among the poorest people and the large quantity of voters. So yeah, I mean, there may be changes at the margin, but I don't think it's something that anybody on this call needs to worry about. And he still has 3 more years on his current term. So it's not something that, by that time, I don't know what people will be thinking of the pandemic in terms of elections and voting. I wish I had a better answer, Joe. I don't
Okay.
know. Okay.
Eddie,
Yeah,
I've tried to add you as a panelist. Ed had a question for you,
sure.
and he'll join us. In the meanwhile, I'll just read to you. With the level of digital health information in the country, does it help India track COVID spread and how vaccinations are rolling out?
So as far as how vaccinations are rolling out, absolutely. They, at any given moment, or I should say at the end of any given day, India knows, the central government in India knows exactly how many vaccinations were given and how many by geography, by zip code, and whatever. So that information is there. Now, as far as the spread of COVID, you know they developed an app right away that you could install on your phone and enter whether you were COVID positive. But unlike China and some other countries where they mandated, you've got to have this if you want to live, right? India is a democracy, and the government doesn't have an ability to force people to do that or to track their cell phones involuntarily. Okay? That being said, my niece, early in the pandemic, had flown from Bangalore to meet my brother in Delhi, and 3 days after she got home, somebody showed up at the door to say, "Hey, are you okay? Do you have any symptoms?" Okay. They were tracking the fact that she had flown from one state to another, and two people showed up at the door, very courteous, not pushy or anything. They just wanted to know. That system has been a little bit overwhelmed as the number of cases skyrocketed. So I can't say that that is still happening in any meaningful way. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, the thing is, I remember early on in the U.S. there was like a temperature app, a thermometer app that was tracking where elevated temperatures were as kind of an early indicator. And I would think that with the did anything like that get tried in India?
Well, so businesses and healthcare facilities were tracking people's temperature before letting them into a facility, but I don't know that that data was integrated with the Aadhaar card and tracked on a national level. There's some that does put in a little bit of a creepy Big Brothery kind of feeling, right? So individual
Sure.
businesses and establishments were protecting themselves to the extent possible, but unlike totalitarian countries where they can mandate those kinds of things, India has not gone that route.
Mm. Well, as an aside, I went to the U.S. A month ago for a family wedding, which is one of the rare ways that you can get into the U.S. from the U.K. right now. And then when we came back, we had to do a self-isolation for 10 days, and the U.K. NHS called us on our cell phones every day for 10 days to interview us. And actually, we live way out in the countryside, and we were watching TV, and my daughter's like, some guy who drove up, he's wearing a yellow vest and a mask. And we were like, now you're joking. And he came to our house to check on us.
Right.
Sanjeev, you had something.
Anyway.
Sanjeev, you had something you wanted to add.
Yeah, so
Thanks, Eddie.
Hi, my experience is that the Modi government actually introduced, there were already PHCs in villages, but they introduced other legislations to start getting more healthcare into rural communities as well, which wasn't the case earlier. So they are trying to do a lot of things, and once in India, once a government puts something in place, the next government, even if they come along, they don't reverse those things. It just continues on. And so Gunjan is right. There's a lot of emphasis now being placed on the rural and the semi-rural sectors compared to what was, the as Gunjan pointed out, the rich or the middle class can take care of themselves. So the government is spending more money on the rural communities now, more and more.
For those of you who might have to jump off the call in 5 minutes, the next two material sections, having looked ahead, are India versus China in terms of outsourcing, and M&A, mergers and acquisitions activity in India. You're welcome to tell me which of those you want him to take a closer look at next, but personally, I'm interested in the India versus China slide. If you could go to the next for
Sure,
us.
sure. Okay. Um, So, are you talking about this one?
Yes, please.
Okay. So, with the last 6 years of this trade war with China, people have been looking at alternative locations to source or manufacture. And I wrote an article for the Harvard Business Review, which I'm happy to share with anybody who wants to email me at the end of this presentation. I wrote an article about manufacturing in India and what its capabilities are. So the first reason why American companies look at India is because they know that there's a higher regard for intellectual property rights. And sometimes in the past, where we had recommended, this is like 5 or 7 years ago, sometimes you would tell people, look, India is not quite ready for this kind of manufacturing. And some of our clients would say, but we do not want to take it to China. We'll either manufacture in the US or, find us the best you can in India. Now, today, India's capabilities have become much more mature. So, around plastics and injection molding, around anything that requires complex manual assembly, there's plenty of white rooms available. Some clean rooms for medical device assembly are also available. India has a long tradition of tool making, so tools and dies for plastics and so on. Those are very easily done in India. There is quite a bit of skill around electronics, whether it's circuit board stuffing or design, whether it's box build. Some of this is through the large ODM companies like Sanmina and Flex, and some of it is through Indian companies that are doing absolutely world-class work. Many parts of the country, and I have a political map with some of the arrows pointing to the New Delhi area, to Gujarat in the west here, and to the Mumbai area, and down here in Kerala. Andhra Pradesh has a big medical park that they've put up. The city of Bangalore has a vibrant medical device ecosystem. And down here, on the southwestern coast of India, the state of Tamil Nadu has many, many medtech companies. And many of these are complete ecosystems. So you'll have the reference labs, the contract facilities for sterilization, all of that, So I'm not going to get into the details. And some of these are set up as what are called special economic zones, so that if you're doing work for export, you don't have to pay duties and taxes and so on. Okay. I have some photographs here, and the work we do for our clients I cannot show because that's all confidential. But if you look carefully at these pictures, this is Becton Dickinson or BD. You can see their logo here. This is their facility outside of Delhi. This here is Abbott's manufacturing facility in Western India, Gujarat. Baxter has two facilities. One is in Bangalore and one is in the city of Gurgaon. The Europeans hide their factory photos. I could not get a photo of the Philips factory in Pune or the Siemens factory where they make the large imaging systems in the state of Goa, which used to be a hippie paradise at one time. So these are large companies with massive manufacturing facilities. GE Healthcare also has one. And many of these are manufacturing for the Indian market, but others are actually exporting to the rest of the world. So there's considerable capability. Does it match or rival China in terms of capacity? Absolutely not. Okay, it's probably less than 10% of the capacity of China. But as you look at the next 10 years, I think this ecosystem will expand dramatically. And it's a big opportunity. As you've seen, President Biden has not cut back on any of the duties and tariffs and the adverse relationship with China. So the companies are realizing now that they have to find alternatives. And as you look across the world, you can bring back work to the US, of course. That's always a good possibility. But if you look at other countries, particularly in the medical device space, as opposed to, say, consumer electronics, India makes for a very good alternative. You didn't get any feedback from the audience, Joe?
Well, I mean, now you're hitting that second point, so go on ahead.
Yeah. So there's tremendous flow of both innovation and money between the United States and India. All the big venture funds have offices in India now. So whether it's Sequoia or Kleiner Perkins or anybody, they all have branch offices in India and are investing in Indian companies. Some of those companies are serving the Indian market. Some of them are serving the global market, and some of them, as I mentioned, are really following that Israeli model where they start out in India and then the CEO and the head of sales move to California and set up an office here, and their main business comes from US customers. Quite a bit of M&A has happened, and some of it was surprising. When Baxter spent almost over $500 million to buy Claris in Western India, that was quite a surprise. And I was even more surprised when Varian, which is now part of Siemens, bought a cancer treatment company, a fairly young cancer treatment company, and they paid over $250 million to buy it out from Texas Pacific Grow. And so they're making a huge commitment to the Indian market. At the bottom, I have an interesting picture. I want to show really the range of things happening. So this guy, Dr. R.V. Kumar, had been developing a device in a small town called Bhopal for the treatment of various kinds of cancer. And it uses a methodology called fast radio bursts, which is not terribly common from what I could tell. But the US FDA has given this device a breakthrough approval. It is still not ready to be commercialized, but chances are good that over the next 5 years, you might see this innovation from an Indian, Indian physician and an inventor actually make its way into the US market, being marketed by a US company, I think, is the way it's going to go. So, quite a bit of stuff that you don't see in the normal medical journals and you don't see mentioned in the popular press, but this is all happening in the background. Okay. I won't go into the details of some other services that are available in India, but these are being used in a big way. So for one of the top medical device companies, I was asked to travel to Hyderabad to meet the company that was doing their intellectual property landscaping and patent reviews and so on. This company had 28 employees. 26 of them were PhDs, okay, working almost exclusively for a company whose name all of us would recognize readily. And these were all people focused on just patent reviews, finding white spaces, preparing patent applications across a fairly wide range of orthopedic devices. So many of these services are now available readily in India. I'll stop there and I can take any questions. I'll stay for as long as you want me to, Joe.
Thank you. Well, I do have a question, and that is, I'm just looking on LinkedIn. It says that Amritt has 12 employees. Is that everyone? I will say your presence makes me feel like it's a big company, but then I saw only 12. I was surprised. So is it just 12 of you?
No, it's not 12 of us. Not everybody is listed on LinkedIn. We are about 25 people within Amritt. And then we have a network of about 100 people who are not on our payroll, but they are experts whom we know well, and we turn to them as needed. So, if we need somebody who's an expert in plastic injection molding, we don't need them 12 months a year, right? We'll turn to them as needed. We need somebody who's an expert on Indian regulations of some special kind, like we're doing a radioactive product, then we will, we will turn to one of those, 100 odd people that are in our close network. I'm a graduate of the Indian Institute of Technology, and I was the president of their Global Alumni Association. So, the IIT alumni pretty much run many of the major companies in India and also many of the government departments. That National Health Digital Mission that I talked about is run by an IIT Kanpur alumnus, who's 3 years senior to me. So I have access to people, in all of those different places in India.
Can you tell me what's characteristic of your clientele? Do they share a common, by the time that you get your first call, have they already decided we're looking into going into India? Because, for example, when you gave us the slide, India versus China, are people thinking, I'm thinking about India versus China, what should I do? Let me ask Indian experts. Or is it they've already kind of started down that path and they want to make sure? When do you get engaged? And is it typically a big company, a smaller company? Can a smaller company afford you? That kind of thing.
Sure. All good questions. We run the gamut. Our largest client,
it will be Medtronic or something.
We are Medtronic, Roche Diagnostics, they're huge companies.
Right.
But I've helped a pre-revenue angel funded startup out of Stanford that had a very low cost solution for wounds that are not healing, and that's a big problem among the poor people in India. So these guys had a device that could do the treatment for like $40 compared to the market leader, where the treatment is $1,000. Okay? They are two Stanford kids, very smart, very motivated. Typically, our clients, though, are larger than that. They have some degree of revenue and the ability to pay us. I'd say $10 million and up is our typical client.
Engagement.
I'm sorry.
A typical engagement is $10 million.
No, a typical client would have at least $10 million of revenue.
Oh, I was going to say
unless they are a
pretty sweet
well-funded
gig.
startup. No, our engagement fees are a little lower than that, Joe.
Fair enough. Do you typically
Otherwise,
pay-
I'd be living on Lanai and I won't be doing these calls.
Oh, come on. You wouldn't hang with me if you were Uber
I would
rich?
hang with you any day. I came to Washington and you didn't want to see me. What can I
That's
say?
not true.
I know.
What?
I'm just pulling your leg.
Come on. So do you typically have an engagement that would we pay you hourly? Is it on retainer? How does it work?
Yeah. Almost never do we charge hourly because as a consultant, I don't want to be paid for
Looking
being
at
slow.
yeah.
So we typically come up with a fixed price or a relatively fixed price with very small variable amounts. And those variable amounts are by criteria that the client can see directly. Okay.
Fair enough.
So most of our work is in that manner. For people who have been clients for a while, we do have retainer arrangements where they can pay us an annual retainer depending on the scope of the work we typically do for them. And that may go on for a year, 2 years, 3 years, depending on the client and their needs.
Well, anyone who's joined our calls with any regularity knows I'm a pretty simple man when you come right down to it. And I don't remember a lot of things. All people on this call need to know is if India, then Gunjan. I mean, that's the whole point. If you have a question about India, I know a guy. You're the guy. That's it.
Thank you, Joe. Yeah, I think that's true.
So I've shared the slides. You'll find them on MTG Premium, and probably see you in California again in May. I hope.
Oh, absolutely. I would love to be there. And the hotel was lovely. If you're going to be at the same one,
place.
Gorgeous.
Same
Yes.
place. I think I might have even gotten a lower daily rate for the room. So we'll see about that.
Awesome. That's wonderful.
Thank everybody for another week, and same bad time, same bad channel next week. Thank you, Gunjan, very much. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Okay. Bye now.
Bye
Have
now.
a good weekend. Bye-bye.